A real ghost. Yes, I've seen a ghost once. I sent an answer to inquiry while my company was standing round the stove of a wayside station waiting to connect with a train bound east from St. Paul. After I left sea, I went out gold mining to Australia, made money, failed, and at last found myself installed second mate of a large English clipper full of passengers and bound for London. We cleared away from Sandridge Pier about midday, and our last passenger to come on board was a young fellow in a long brown ulsters. Ulsters were new then and remarkable. The only other one I knew was worn by Fanny, a beautiful young girl who had lately arrived from England and to whom I had become greatly attached. The passenger was shipped home by his friends with special instructions to our captain to keep him away from liquor. He was an absolute wreck from drink. Our booby hatch had been filled at last with a quantity of colonial wine, one of the first shipments home from the colonier, but there was plenty of room in the cut of the hatchway for a man to stand. Well, we had been to sea some weeks and were battering away round the Horn with the head wind and cold as the deuce. The snow and ice were thick everywhere and it was blowing hard. I swore if I once got out of it, I would never voluntarily go to sea again. One night, I had the middle watch, that is from 12 to 4 in the morning, and I was sitting on the hen coop under weather cloth in the mizzen rigging when I heard the captain come up. He had with him the young man in the brown ulster. The captain gave me orders, took a turn up and down, said good night, and went below. There was no one left on the poop but myself and the man at the wheel, for it was so cold I gave the youngster who had to strike the bills leave to go below until I called. I suppose I must have got numbed by the cold and slept, for I was awakened by the relief wheel at 4 bells, who gave me the course as he went below. I took a turn aft and saw the young man with the brown ulster leaning over the taffrail, but when I turned aft again, he had gone down the companion, which faced the helmsman, and was the only entrance on deck from the saloon. I asked the helmsman how long the young man had been on deck. I was somewhat taken back when he assured me there had been no one there. I thought I had been dreaming, so didn't press the matter. Shortly afterward, the moon, which had been obscured through the clouds amid everything, covered as it was with snow, bright as day. As I turned aft in my walk, I saw the man in the ulster leaning over the lee rail close to the helm. I walked aft to speak to him. As I approached, he turned toward me in the moonlight, and to my horror I saw the face of Fanny. The figure stood for a moment, and then seemed to go overboard. I shouted, "Down with the helm! Man overboard!" The watch came tumbling aft. In a moment, all hands were on deck. The ship flew up the wind, and I swung her main yard aback. "Who is it, Mr. Blue?" asked the captain. "It's a passenger, sir," I answered, "with a long ulster." We lowered the boat, but there was no trace of him. The muster roll was cold, and the young fellow was gone sure enough. We braced up our yards and felled away again, and after a few days ran into the weather and forgot all about the lost passenger, who was duly entered in the logbook as lost overboard. One day in the tropics, the captain gave orders to have the hatches off and let some air into the hold. The last hatch to be removed was booby hatch aft, an ornamental teakwood affair on which passengers used to sit, and which formed a quiet feature of the quarter deck. As we raised the hatches, a sickening smell came up the hold. "There's dead rats there, sir, sure," said the carpenter to me. Off came the hatches, and there, to our horror, in the fierce sunlight of the tropics, with everything bright and gay about us, children laughing and playing everyone happy, we disclosed the bloated and decomposed corpse of the young man in the brown ulster. By his side was a broken case of wine and 2 or 3 empty bottles, showing plainly how he had died. The problem of how he got into the hold was soon solved. There was a large brass ventilator just abaft the main 5 rail, and knowing that drink was stowed down there, he had lowered himself down to get it. On my arrival in Thames, our long-looked-for mail was brought on board by our agents. Among the first letters I opened was one bearing Melbourne postmark. I opened it hurriedly, for I was anxious for news. It was from a stranger, simply enclosing a newspaper paragraph. On Sunday last at number Street, East Melbourne, Fanny, only daughter of Thomas, died of inflammation of lungs. My mind rushed back to the night off Cape Horn when I had seen her face in the moonlight. I turned the leaves of the logbook, and there, on the same date as the notice in the newspaper clipping, was the entry: Richard, passenger, jumped or fell overboard 3 a.m. Signed, Kyrle Bellew, Second Officer, Ship TS.